Thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview with me. It's just an incredible journey that you've had doing these hypermiling tests with the Tesla Model 3. So I was just curious because everyone has their own reasons, but why do you drive an electric car? What is your reason for
Yeah,
that?
I get that. I get that question a lot, and it's kind of threefold. One is the environmental aspect of it, knowing that it's a zero emissions car. Two, the economics of it. I drive quite a bit. In fact, the first 12 months that I owned my Model S, I drove 65,000 miles. So there was a huge economic aspect of it that was important to me. When I ran the numbers, the Model S was, you know, I theorize equally expensive as my Subaru Legacy, and I thought that maybe it might be a little bit less expensive. So the economics piece as well. Lastly, as the style, it's a cool car. It's a really cool design. So threefold for me.
Okay, it makes a lot of sense to me. So what you've done is something called hypermiling, and
Yeah.
uh, maybe that word might be like some people might not know
Not
what
as
that
common
means.
of a word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is
Yep.
hypermiling exactly?
Yeah. We got that question a lot on our live stream while we were doing this attempt, but
Mm-hmm.
and it's not a word that's exclusive to electric vehicles. People who use gas vehicles are usually familiar with this term, but from our perspective, it was charging up the Model 3 to 100% and driving it as far as possible on a single charge to see how many miles we could get out of it. And in order to do this in an electric vehicle, in order to hit that 606 miles that we did, we had to reduce the car's systems like AC. We kept the windows up. We turned down the brightness on the screen, so we reduced the car's systems to as little essentials as possible, and we also reduced the speed in which we were driving to between 22 miles an hour and 30 miles an hour. So there were some cases where on the less trafficked part of our 1 mile loop, we were traveling 22 miles an hour. And then when we turned a corner to a little bit busier of a road, we bumped it up to between 20 miles an hour and 30. Towards the end, we were doing 30 miles an hour just because we didn't see that much of a difference in energy usage of the car.
Mm-hmm.
So stretching out the car for as long as possible on a single charge is what hypermiling is.
Okay, makes sense. Now you had two different tests that hypermiling tests, and maybe you weren't satisfied with the first one, so you wanted to try a
Yeah.
longer one. So
Right.
you
So,
used
so
these
the
two different routes. So tell me a little bit about what they were and what the differences were.
yeah, that's actually some interesting insight that no one has asked me yet. The first attempt was 2 or 3 weeks ago, um, in which I planned a route from Denver at that same supercharger that we started and ended with for this most recent one. But in this initial attempt, I drove from Denver as far east as I could possibly go, and I intended on ending up somewhere in Kansas City, Missouri. But when I looked at the map and looked at the elevation when I first began the trip, it showed kind of a downtrend. But when I actually got on the road, Highway 36, which was beautiful, I'd never seen kind of the eastern part of Colorado and the northern part of Kansas, which is where Highway 36 takes you. What you realize when you kind of zoom in and you're actually kind of ground level on that highway is there's lots of rolling hills. So you
Mm-hmm.
even though you are kind of going down in elevation, your car is kind of going up a hill and then down a hill and then up a hill and then down a hill. The middle part of that route was really good. I was averaging about 120 watt hours per mile, but towards the end, before I stopped the trip, it seemed like I was kind of going up in elevation. It was at night, so it was really hard to tell. But that end of my journey ate into a lot of the energy in the battery. So by the time I ended the trip shorter than what I planned, I think I finished with 126 watt hours per mile. And I stopped early because I wanted to end at a supercharger, and I didn't want to wait for forever at a level 2 charging station.
Yeah.
So I did kind of take a detour towards Topeka, Kansas, which was south of Highway 36. So I had to start heading south, but I wasn't quite confident that on that trip I would make it to Topeka. I was already pretty low on range, and so I ended up pulling the plug on that one at 11% of the battery left and 515.7 miles, I believe, traveled. So it was a little bit disappointing because I did have to cut it out early. I wanted to go further, but because I just didn't know the area, I decided to stop short, saving myself being stranded on a highway where I didn't know the area, waiting for I've maybe reluctantly ran out of battery 3 times in my Model S, so I know exactly what it's like sitting in a car that has very little power, waiting for a tow truck for. I mean, in the first time I ran out in my Model S, I was waiting for 3 hours. So, probably some of those memories were going through my mind as I was thinking about, should I keep going and try and make it to Kansas, or should I stop? I decided to stop at a Native American reservation where they had a level 2 charging, a destination charger at a casino. So I stopped that journey about 5:30 in the morning, plugged in, crashed for 5 hours in the back of the Model 3, and then got up and drove the rest of the way to Topeka.
So there's a lot of stats going on there. How did you track all of this progress? Were you using like a computer to keep all of this, or the Model 3 shows you all of that on the screen? How do you?
I planned the route from my computer using Google Maps, and Google Maps shows you elevation change. So that was. I mean, after 2 of these attempts, the elevation change. I mean, if someone is planning on trying this again, my advice would be to make sure that you are really thorough with your route and knowing what the elevation change is. The smaller the elevation change, the better, which we can get into when we talk about the most recent Hypermile record. But Google Maps initially to plan out the route, and then I used the 15-inch touchscreen on the Model 3 to keep track of miles since last charged, kilowatt hours used, as well as watt hours per mile. So the Model 3, as well as the Model S and X, they show you those 3 metrics on the screen.
On the screen, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's pretty easy if it's just displayed right there.
Incredibly easy. Yeah, super easy. One thing that the Model 3 doesn't have on their screen that the S and X do currently is the energy graph. There's an energy graph on the S and the X that kind of gives you a bar graph. It would have been nice to have that with the Model 3 on these attempts. I'm sure Tesla will add that in the future, but all we had to kind of track our energy usage and miles traveled were those 3 metrics that I mentioned.
Okay, so what is your motivation behind doing these tests? Like, why do you want to hypermile a Model 3?
Probably two or 3 reasons. One, and most importantly, to raise more awareness about the viability of electric vehicles. I get a lot of questions still about, how far can you travel? And when I tell them that my Model S travels about 200 miles and that there's, upwards of 300 miles in newer versions, they're really, really surprised. So, so this Hypermile attempt, the primary purpose was just to raise awareness about electric vehicles. And I'd say, secondly, since no one had ever done this in a Model 3, to just do something that no one had ever done before. For both Eric and I, Eric was my co-pilot in this adventure. For both Eric and I, we would consider Teslas not only as a form of transportation, but also a hobby. So on both of our respective YouTube channels, we're doing videos about For me, my angle that I take, because I do drive a lot, is how's the Model S how's the electric vehicle wear over time? What's battery degradation like? What are my costs? What are the costs that I've incurred over the miles that I've driven? And those sort of things. So it's a hobby for us as well. And because no one had ever done this before in the Model 3, we thought it would be really, really cool to just try it and see how far it can travel.
Mm-hmm. So this might have attracted some attention from somebody. Did you manage to get like any sponsors or anything through this process?
We did get some sponsors, and thankfully they were pretty last minute.
Okay.
Eric and I met for lunch probably a week before this trip, and we just kind of talked through who we thought might be willing and interested to sponsor this. Our reason for sponsoring was because if we did manage to kind of cross over 600 miles or beat my previous record, we wanted to submit it to the Guinness Book of World Records.
Oh,
and
awesome.
With that comes a cost of many thousands of dollars to submit that and get that in the Guinness Book. So we thought one of the ways to finance that was to bring on some like-minded companies. All of them, ironically, ended up being based here in Denver. Two of them serve not only Denver but clients outside. The first one, which is kind of our platinum or premier sponsor, was Wonder Capital. They do solar. You can invest into their company, and they're doing solar projects. And so instead of investing into the stock market, if you're a believer in clean energy, you can invest into Wonder, and they build solar projects around the U.S., I believe. The other one that does kind of provide services outside of Denver is FYIN.com. They are a web service company, so they do web development and similar projects for clients. We also had a couple of local specific companies. One of them, a Tesla certified auto body shop, Stuttgart. And I've personally worked with them, which is the reason why I reached out to them, and they did a great job. And then lastly, Colorado Detail, which are paint correction and paint protection. So they do clear wraps, they do body wraps, they do restoration of paint. I mean, I've seen some crazy videos of cars, not only Teslas, but cars coming in with a lot of swirls, a lot of paint swirls on the paint. And they'll come in and they'll restore that paint, and it looks literally like a brand new car. So those were our four sponsors, all pretty relative to electric vehicles, renewable energies. FYIN, the owner of that company is a Tesla owner and a member of the Denver Tesla Club. So when he heard about it, he just, even though it wasn't quite relevant to what we were doing, he wanted to be kind of a part of it. And support some other Tesla owners in an interesting project.
Wow. Okay. Now, were they the sponsors like on the side of the car, like a NASCAR, or what were they? What was their?
We had, yeah. So that was one of the things that we kind of offered up to them, was to have their logos on the side of the car.
Yeah. Okay.
So we had their four logos in vinyl form, white vinyl form, on the side of the car. Colorado Detail actually helped put those vinyls on. And then for Wonder Capital, since they were a premier sponsor, not only did we have their logos on the side of the car, but we wore their caps.
Right.
And we also had their logo on the back seat in the middle. So when we were doing the live stream and the camera was facing us, their branding was also inside of the car as well. We had Stuttgart's, we wore Stuttgart auto body t-shirt as well. While we were driving, so that t-shirt did get a little very worn and a little sweaty.
So 515 miles to 606. That's incredible. So what else did you notice that was different from the two tests? The elevation. You mentioned the elevation change. Was there anything else that was a factor in the ability to do 606 miles?
The elevation change was the biggest factor. When we selected this new route, and we tested probably 5 different routes or circuits in the Denver area. The challenge with Denver's topography is that you have a lot of rolling hills, and a lot of kind of downsloping towards downtown Denver, and then of course it starts to kind of go up into the Rocky Mountains. Um, but we just ran into a lot of rolling hills, and we went through 4 or 5 different routes. And I was actually up late the night before in the Model 3 testing out routes, Thursday night. And with no avail. I tried 2 or 3. It just wasn't getting the watt hours low enough. I actually went home, and as I was falling asleep, I thought about one actually came to mind, which is really close to the supercharger that we started and ended with. And it's just a bunch of hotels in the area, and I thought I think that actually might work because it was a short enough distance, a mile loop, that the elevation change because of the limited distance, I was pretty certain would work to our advantage, and the elevation change would be small and insignificant. So that was probably the biggest thing. We also knew that the air conditioner used some energy, and when you're traveling 600 miles, that can have a big impact. So the air conditioner was turned off. The windows were rolled up for most of the trip. Towards the end, we determined that going at such a slow speed, the windows didn't really have any significant impact on our watt hours per mile. We also had the stock 18-inch Aero wheel covers on. That as well, at slow speeds, I'm not entirely confident that would have had any positive impact with them on. But with if we had like a week to kind of prep for this, and a week with the Model 3, maybe we could have tested those things and created some interesting videos on our YouTube channels. In addition to that, we also filled up the tires to 50 psi. I think that one probably was another large impact on traveling so far.
Mm-hmm.
The door jam in the Model 3 recommends 42 psi. The tires say a 50 psi max, so we push that to the max, and I could actually, after I filled up the tires to 50 psi, I noticed less rolling resistance. So I think that likely had a significant impact on the distance that we traveled as well.
Awesome! Wow, that is that's great.
A lot of thought went into it.
Yeah,
a lot of thought went into it to try and maximize the range.
Yeah. So you probably, if you would go back and do either of those tests again, would you change anything? Maybe to make more range, make it go further. Anything else?
we had a lot of questions on the live stream if we took out any of the interior panels of the car to reduce the reduce the weight.
Reduce the weight, yeah, right.
Right. I know some other people. There's another Tesla channel, Tesla Racing channel, I think, where this guy has a P100D and he drag races other cars. He got to the point where he started removing panels and seats to reduce the weight. We didn't go that route, most importantly because it's not our car. We borrowed it from a friend, and so we also got the question of why we went with 2 people, because a second person added an additional 175 to 200 pounds. We had some stuff. We really didn't put a lot of thought into the weight thing. I mean, probably insignificant. I mean, we probably had an additional 100 to 200 pounds of extra weight. And I don't know if that had any significant impact. Maybe we would have been able to eke out another 5 miles if we didn't have an extra person or didn't have the extra food and stuff in the car. But then you run into traveling for 32 hours on a single driver. Just my initial trip that I went on my own was tiring. So having 2 people in the car definitely made it doable to have the rider in the car sleep for a little while.
Right.
I think that helped out quite a bit. So if I were to kind of choose, I think that having a co-pilot definitely is a better approach, even if just for safety purposes.
Awesome. Well, that's all the information that I was looking for about the tests, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this with me again. It's really great to learn so much about the Model 3. So thank you again.
Absolutely. Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for reaching out and asking to meet up on video to do the interview.